Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ACT's September webinar event. We're going to get started here in just another moment, so just hang tight for just about another minute and we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Casey Murphy and I'm ACT's Events and Programs Manager. I want to thank you for joining us today for our September webinar event entitled 3Ps of Transportation, Why Facilities Challenges Aren't Always What They Seem. Our presenters this afternoon will be Eric Van Weyden, Executive Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer for We Drive You, Brant Carter, Director of Facilities for NVIDIA, and Tamar Furrier, Associate Director, Transportation and Commuter Services at Kite Pharma. Before we get started, and before we hear from some of our presenters this afternoon, I wanted to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First, just to reconfirm with everyone, all attendees are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or a problem hearing us, please hit the question mark sign to the left of your name and type in your question. I will do my best as we go through the webinar to answer any questions that you might have once it gets going, but please make sure you use that if you do have a question throughout the webinar. We will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type in your questions as we go to the left of your name again in the question mark sign, and we'll make sure that we get them answered by the end of the session. Finally, this session is being recorded, and I will have all the recordings up on the ACT website within 24 hours after the presentation ends. We are also fortunate enough today to have the PDF of the slides in the handout section just below your name in the handout toolbar there to be downloaded so you can follow along with us. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce to you David Strauss, ACT Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT has going on.
Thanks, Casey. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. As the premier transportation demand management organization in the United States, ACT is working and striving to build a strong community of professionals working to advance and implement TDM at their work sites and within their communities. It's great to see that we had over 200 people registered for today's call, representing a wide range of sectors, the private employers, city-state agencies, TMAs, regional rideshare programs, consultants, and service providers. It's always great to see how wide of a tent that the TDM industry represents, bringing everyone together within ACT. As a leading advocate for TDM, we strive to get the most out of our transportation system while improving the lives of commuters, increasing the livability of communities, and supporting the economic growth of businesses as we look to create a better journey for everyone. For those of you that are members of ACT, we greatly appreciate your support and look forward to your continued involvement nationally as well as locally through your chapters and councils and themed councils. For those of you that are not members, we hope that you will consider joining ACT and being a part of the largest network of TDM professionals in the country. In fact, we are just 3 people shy of 1,000 members, so perhaps you can be that lucky person who will bring us over that 1,000 mark by joining the organization. We offer many opportunities for professional development and networking throughout the year. Coming up next week, in fact, we have our public policy fly-in in DC, an opportunity to add your voice to ACT's advocacy efforts and help us raise the profile of TDM within federal transportation policy. There is still time to register and to participate in Hill visits and other briefings that we have going on over the 2 days. Our TDM forum is November 13th and 14th in Nashville. It will feature 2 days of discussions on TDM, featuring case studies and best practices, as well as our awards for TDM excellence and our 40 under 40 recognition, providing awards to emerging leaders and young professionals within the industry. And then coming up in February of 2019 is our next Impact Leadership Program, a perfect opportunity for emerging leaders and individuals with less than 10 years experience in the field to network and have 3 days of professional coaching and learning about TDM and how to get the most out of their involvement in the Association for Commuter Transportation. So it's a pleasure now to shift us into today's webinar, the 3 Ps of transportation and why a facility's challenges aren't always what they seem. Today, the webinar will present some of the biggest transportation challenges for work sites and campuses, and we'll hear about common mobility concerns and take a deep dive into how employers, universities, and property managers are working to solve their transportation challenges. Before I introduce our first speaker, please take a moment to tell us what sector best describes your organization. And we'll leave this up for just a few seconds for folks to jump in there. We were limited to only 5 answers, so we know there's going to be a lot in the other category. As I said, we have a pretty wide tent of organizations that are in here. So we'll go ahead and close that up now and get a chance to see the results. Great. So 21% from employers, which is excellent to see. Public sector, 35%, and service providers, which is a wide option there. TMAs, VAMPools, TNCs, price shuttles as a part of the service provider piece. That's great. A wonderful group of panelists today, and it's my pleasure to first introduce Eric Van Wagen, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer at WeDriveU, where he leads WeDriveU's go-to-market strategy, overseeing sales, marketing, customer success, and strategic partnerships. For over 10 years, Eric has developed and expanded WeDriveU's client base, driving revenue growth and scaling WeDriveU nationwide. Eric has a bachelor's degree in productions and operations management from California State University Hayward School of Business and Economics. He is a member of ACT, and as well, WeDriveU is a great supporter and sponsor of ACT and its activities throughout the year. Please join me in welcoming Eric Van Wagen.
Great, thanks, David. Appreciate the intro. And yeah, we've been a big supporter of ACT, and it's a pleasure to be on this call today. So, discussion for today is to go through the 3 Ps that organizations face, understand find out the underlying issues to the challenges they are facing, and then we'll get into some real-world examples of how these challenges are being addressed today by some great other panelists. So, when we go to the next slide. So 3 Ps. So we talked about parking, people, and productivity. And just to give some background on WeDriveU and position this to how we're seeing these 3 Ps in the market. So currently we're serving over 6.1 million passengers across the U.S. With multiple different customers in different segments and different sectors. And so in the process of all of our discussions and services that we have with people, we're seeing that these 3 Ps come up pretty often. And one of the things that we'll get into is that, these 3 Ps are not always what they seem to be. And so parking, biggest challenge is, you either have not enough parking, or you have too much parking, or parking's too expensive, takes up too much real estate. And that's a big challenge for people out there. We're also seeing that with people recruiting and retaining talent, it's a good economy for most of our clients, and especially in the areas we serve. And so people are very, very important for them, and being able to retain and recruit them is a big challenge they're seeing today. And productivity, so not getting enough out of people's days. So obviously, if you're spending time commuting, things like that, it takes a big chunk out of the opportunity for the business opportunity that we see our clients having. So we'll go through these 3 Ps, and we'll get to kind of what the root cause of some of these challenges are. So next slide. So keeping with the theme of not quite what things seem to be, so I thought this was a great picture showing a commuter on a train. You know, what was interesting was that, well, maybe seeing a dog commuting isn't really a crazy thing, but you know, seeing somebody on a train without looking at their phone is probably actually the crazier thing. So maybe not quite what it seems, and so that's where we're going to get to the underlying theme here of when you have people, parking, and productivity, is that you have some background information there, and we'll get into how Brant and Tamar, our next speakers here, are going to go into how they are addressing these challenges of either going into looking at how transportation can solve those challenges of parking and fixing the access to it, as well as people, getting people to recruit and retain talent using transportation, as well as using transportation to improve productivity within their workforce. And so we'll go ahead and get into the next presenter. So you go to the next slide.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Eric. Next up, we have Brant Carter, Director of Facilities at NVIDIA. Brant is a veteran program management, manufacturing, and facilities professional, having performed in this capacity at NVIDIA since 1999. His past includes service in high-tech program management, manufacturing roles at TRW and Selectron prior to coming to NVIDIA. Brant also served in the U.S. Navy, where he deployed to the Persian Gulf for Desert Storm in 1990-91. He retired after 30 years at the rank of captain. Please join me in welcoming Brant Carter.
Thank you, David, and I'd like to welcome everybody out there online. By way of introduction, just say that we started the alternative commuting program at NVIDIA approximately 3 years ago. The way we did that is to go out and interview many of our counterpart companies in our industry here in Silicon Valley, the likes of Google, Facebook, Yahoo, LinkedIn, and so on. And our idea was really to get an idea of how they did alternative commuting, what kind of programs they had in place as benefits to their employees, to improve work life, provide incentives to come to work there. Not with the idea that we were going to copy necessarily, but with the idea that we would take that input and decide what was going to work best for NVIDIA. So it's been an exciting 3 years for my team and, of course, our company. A lot of you probably know we're I call it the pole position of the artificial intelligence revolution on PCs. We've seen an explosion in growth in the company. Right now, we're about 7,000 employees in Silicon Valley, roughly 12,000 globally. But we're projecting growth to about 20,000 employees here in Silicon Valley in the next 2 years. So, and in parallel, we've seen new building projects all over Silicon Valley, principally Santa Clara and Sunnyvale. Santa Clara and San Jose, some in Sunnyvale. And you're actually seeing a competition between cities because they want to attract talent, not just to come to work, but to come to live. So the heart of the challenge then is, how do we reduce congestion? How do we reduce the demand on parking? How do we incent people from all over the nation to come to Silicon Valley and not only work but also live? So and that's NVIDIA's kind of microcosm of that picture. So we've taken that to heart. Our executive staff has been really good about trying to support this program. And by the way, we've kind of taken it a step further because at NVIDIA we believe and we want to strive to become good corporate citizens and also good citizens and partners of the community and the environment. So, and hence the name we gave to our program was Green to Work, kind of a play on words there. So, and at the same time of this growth in San Jose and Santa Clara and Silicon Valley in general. We've also seen a real explosion in our building programs for our local campus. And while we're not Apple's spaceship, we have completed our first building, which was 500 square feet, and we have a follow-on building that just started that's going to be 750,000 square feet, 3,700 employees. Well, one of the stipulations of the permitting process was that we couldn't have the same number of parking spaces that we had employee occupancy. So, and of course, also the parking was going to be all underground. So, of course, it's much more expensive to build a parking space underground than just surface parking. So, the challenge was clear, and also because of the rapid growth, we needed other facilities and plans on how we were going to fit all these employees into our campus, fill the gap between our first building, which we call Endeavor, and our second building, which we call Voyager. And so it's really been incumbent on our Green to Work program to have creative alternative commuting programs to help reduce the demand on parking, get employees out of their cars, out of the parking lot, reduce the congestion on roads. And so in interviewing a lot of the companies here in the Valley, what we determined is that the strategy that would work best for NVIDIA would be to get our employees to existing infrastructure. So last mile and or first mile and last mile shuttles to get them to public transit. So we have a pretty good infrastructure in the Bay Area, surrounding the Bay between Caltrain, H Train, which is the Altamont Corridor Express, BART, which is Bay Area Rapid Transit. So all of these kind of a confluence of public transit infrastructure. So what we've done is invested in last mile shuttles to do so. We've invested in our ride sharing and carpool programs through strategic partnerships. The largest of which is with We Drive You. So we work with Eric and company to put in place a strategic agreement, not only for shuttles, but for all of our alternative commuting programs, how we could put in place efficient programs to achieve our strategic objectives. Additionally, NVIDIA provides incentive to our employees to use public transit through a $100 a month public transit subsidy, which is also applicable to Vanpool and Vanpools and Uberpool. Again, to incentivize our employees to participate in these programs, and it could be anywhere from a couple days a week to 5 days a week. And the idea is that we want to make things as flexible as possible to really maximize the participation. So, because we realize that our employees have variable schedules, not always a fixed 9 to 5 schedule. We need to accommodate software engineers that might come in at noon and stay till midnight. So it's been fun. It's been interesting. It's been great to interact with all of our constituent companies in the Valley to really come up with exciting programs and be able to invest. Our principal key performance indicator for our program is really employee percent participation. So we monitor that through registration with our team, whether it's a carpool or vanpool. Those that ride shuttles, we've worked with We Drive You on the technology side to use an application to be able to track our shuttles, track ridership, and determine from that how we need to grow capacity to meet the demand. So it's been fun, it's been exciting, and I hope and encourage everybody out there to look at ways to get people out of cars, get them off the road and out of the parking lots, and make our work environment and our commuting environment a lot better. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brant. Just a reminder to everyone, this webinar will be recorded and will be available up on the ACT website, usually within 24 hours, and you'll be able to find it up on the archive of webinar recordings, where we store all of our past webinar presentations. Our final speaker today is Tamar Fuhrer, the Associate Director for Transportation and Commuter Services at Kite Pharma. Tamar has been working in the transportation industry for over a decade and is currently leading the global transportation and commuter services programs for Kite, a biotechnology company headquartered in Santa Monica. In her role, Tamar has been developing and implementing mobility solutions to address the rapid growth of the company. Prior to joining Kite, Tamar worked as a transportation planning manager in LA, in LA Metro's Office of Extraordinary Innovation and Operations, and as a senior transportation planner at Furr and Piers. She's vice chair of the Go Santa Monica TMO, an advisory team, volunteer chair, and a current mentor for the LA chapter of Women in Transportation Seminar, and is active in her local APA, American Planning Association, and ACT chapters. Please join me in welcoming Tamar.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tamar Fuhrer, and I head up the Transportation and Commuter Services program at Kite. I joined Kite in April of this year, having had my entire career previously to this in more of a traditional transportation planning role. So most of my colleagues up until this point had been fellow transportation planners or civil engineers or other forms of transportation enthusiasts. And then I go and I join a biotechnology company that's working on treatments for cancer. So at first I thought it would be a lot different. It actually has been probably the most transportation heavy role I've had to date. And it presented a bunch of different challenges and opportunities I sort of jumped right into. So Kite had initially been a startup biotech company working on cancer treatment. They were small. They were really nimble because they were small. So they had a lot of employees coming from one area. They said, hey, we need to get down and we need to get down here. We can't deal with the traffic anymore. So somebody brought in a shuttle to transport those employees down to the site. At one point, they were offering parking cash out and telling people that they could Uber it into work. About a year ago, two things happened. One was that they received FDA approval to commercially grow the treatment that they were working on. So that meant extreme growth really quickly. The second piece was that we were acquired by a larger biopharmaceutical company, and so that enabled us to grow really quickly, but also making sure that everything's in order and also scalable to that growth. So spot treatments here or there would no longer work. And when I joined the company, the main goal was to really take a step back, look at what the transportation program was at present, how we needed to grow it to address our employees and the local area, and then go from there. Another opportunity that we have is that we're headquartered in Santa Monica, so in the LA area, and Santa Monica is a really progressive city in the region. They have a very aggressive transportation demand management ordinance. One of our locations is actually on land that's owned by the city, so we have additional requirements by the development agreement. So on top of parking being tight, we also, even if we wanted to acquire more parking, that's not going to happen. Like, that's not allowable by the development agreement. We have a pretty aggressive average vehicle ridership requirement that's done through annual commute surveys. So that's through both the air basin and through the city. So really getting more people on an alternative commute program, but being able to set one up that could grow at the speed of the company growth were the really important focuses. At the same time, they had recently done a company-wide employee survey, and a lot of the feedback that came back was that they loved working for the company, but the mega commute, 60% of our employees have a commute that's over 1 hour in each direction. That they said, long term, they were concerned about the sustainability of being able to do that commute. Santa Monica is not a biotech hub, so a lot of employees that were established in their careers that are really top candidates are coming from a ways away. So my goals were to attract and retain the talent and changing the conversation from being solely about sustainability to really being about the employees and how can we help out our employees. Addressing the public transit disconnect. So we do have a light rail line that opened just a couple of years ago and is in walking distance from all of our Santa Monica sites, as well as we have another location for manufacturing in El Segundo and have a light rail line that's within walking distance of that. The challenge is that we have a pretty large disconnect between where our employees live and where those transit lines service. So only about 10% of our employees are within what you would consider a transit accessible area from their residence into work. So how do we get people to work if public transit's not a solution? And then also enhancing productivity and work-life balance. So if our employees can't really relocate directly to the Santa Monica area or to the west side of LA, how can their commute time be productive? What are we able to do to make them happy with both the work that they're doing here, but also not stressing about their commutes? And then as an added bonus, anyone who's getting out of their car, that's helping us hit our goals and requirements by both the development agreement and the TDM ordinance. Next. So as I mentioned, we did have a shuttle that was providing service from one of our areas with high commute. As we were growing, I was also noticing that we have other areas that weren't yet being serviced by any alternative commute, so had the same geographic issues of not being transit accessible, still having that long haul commute of 90 minutes or an hour in each direction. So what was the way that we would be able to say, this is why one area is getting a shuttle and this one's not, or just putting them in across the board and in areas that didn't make sense? So we basically mapped out our employees, looked at where there were hotspots, and set up a methodology for where we're going to be putting in long distance commuter shuttles. So we already knew there was one area where we have about 20% of our employee population coming from. So this is over 200 employees coming into Santa Monica daily. And we knew what the ridership was on the current transit offerings. We did need to scale those up, and we're working with We Drive You to transition over the existing program, but also growing into other areas where we have enough employees along a logical route, basically, to support one vehicle and then a way for us to scale up. And so by having that method in place, we're growing our program. So we're going to be next month launching into 3 new service areas in addition to our existing one, but also have a way to add new vehicles to the fleet and also consider other areas down the road that may also have similar commute characteristics, and knowing when we trigger the addition of a new service route. We also have parking cash out. So people who are choosing to do an alternative commute, in addition to receiving a transit subsidy, they can also cash out their parking and get what we are currently paying for their parking space. And we're separating those two. So we have some people who are riding shuttles, who are taking public transit, who will be carpooling or doing other programs where there is a benefit, they can also take advantage of parking cash out. And so that allows that flexibility to say, if you're a part-time user, you don't have to say either or and now be dissuaded from taking transit or taking the shuttle because of that day or two that you're going to have to drive in. Likewise, I've been noticing more of that behavioral change of people who were taking it very regularly at that 60 to 80%, now opting to give up their parking spot for the financial benefit and being creative of either committing full time or, finding, I can drive to the closest transit station and then take the train for the last part of my journey. So really getting people to think more about their commutes. We're able to, with all of these programs, be improving the passenger's experience. We have Wi-Fi on board so people can work and really just upgrading our service offerings so that people can be productive on board and be more comfortable for the length of their commute. So a lot of our programs have been being rolled out incrementally. I have noticed a pretty substantial jump in the last few months as we've been rolling out programs, and then in the next few weeks we'll be expanding our shuttle service offerings, and there's a lot of excitement locally around that.
Thank you, Tamar. I really appreciate everything. That is a wonderful synopsis there. Real quickly, as I've already started to get a bunch of questions coming in, wanted to do a poll to identify here, which of the 3 Ps from today's discussion do you consider most important? We're going to launch it now. Just want to get some feedback before we open it up here kind of for Brant and Tamar to kind of deep dive a little further here into some of the questions you guys all have. Okay, looks like the people is a big one for most of you here, which is awesome. I'm going to close it out here in just a second. Okay, looks like, and I'm going to share this here, people, 71% of you feel that people is the most important P. So it's very interesting to know. Thank you guys for putting that down, something we can use for another discussion topic later on. Want to jump into a couple questions here right off the bat. I'll start real quickly with Tamar, just because I got a few at the end here. Tamar, when you were talking about the parking rides, did employees meet at existing parking rides to catch the private shuttle?
Yeah, so I think up in the Bay Area of San Francisco, parking is a little bit more of a challenge, but right now they do meet at a public park and ride, and we are starting with those park and rides, making sure that we're aware of what the rules are. Like, are these places that allow a private shuttle pickup, or are they intended really only for public transit use? So we have been working both internally and with We Drive You on citing locations, but even before I started, when they had an existing shuttle service, they've been using public park and rides for those.
Okay, great. And just to remind all of you again, you do have a question, as I see them starting to come in here, please type them in that question mark sign to the left of your name, and we'll make sure we try to get as many as we can answered within this hour time slot here. My next question for Tamar and Brant, what are some of the ways you communicate with commuters at your companies and drive participation? And what do they respond best to? I'll start with you first, Brant, if you don't mind.
No, thank you, not at all. What we did is, because public transit infrastructure is where we get most of our employees to and from, we created distribution lists, ride-sharing lists, whatever you'd like to call them, and then we established a PIC, or whether you can define that as a person in charge or a pilot in command, whatever you want to call it, which we made an ad hoc member of our Green to Work team. So whenever we had meetings to talk about options, then we'd always broach them with the PIC, and then we, based on the PIC giving us representation from the ridership, then typically what we would do is host a town hall where we would invite employees to come, and we basically then would socialize options for programs or options for pickup and drop-off times, whatever it might be, you name it. That's the way we would come to a decision, and then we would represent the largest majority of employees for which a program or an option would work best as the decision. And most of our employees pretty well accept that. We have newsletters that go out once a week. We have digital signage that we have posted in all of our cafeterias, where in looping fashion we run advertisements for the programs we have, how to get signed up. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, we've had a explosion in growth. So we have roughly 30 to 40 new employees coming in every week. So they all have the same questions. What kind of programs are available? How can I get from this point to this point? Or if they just need help with a personalized commuter solution, then we advertise how to get in touch with us. They know where we're at. So that's basically how we interface with our employees.
Tamar, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so we are working on some really similar initiatives to what Brent had mentioned. So getting the word out with new hire orientation, we did do targeted surveys to the areas where we were looking to expand shuttle service to understand where they were living, what pieces were most important to them. I've also made an effort to go to staff meetings or do a road show and say, these are the challenges that I'm hearing from your employees, and then here's solutions that we have going through. We will be doing a transportation fair at each of our sites and bringing the vendors to the employees so that they can understand the whole menu of options. Email communication has been pretty useful. And then the other piece that sort of came a little unexpectedly, but has been really effective, is that because we have to get badge access for parking, I wind up working with HR with onboarding and getting the information. These are the employees who are starting this week. This is where they'll be seated. And so I'm a few days before they are starting, I'm sending them an email saying, hey, welcome to Kite. This is where you'll be sitting. Do you need parking or do you prefer the cash out? Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help you with your commute, and getting that interaction on day one. And a lot of employees, are happy to hear from another, fellow coworker, but are, get that one-to-one commute assistance, and likewise just offering that service to talent acquisition and to hiring managers, because sometimes they're getting the questions as early as, at the beginning of the recruiting. So letting them know what's available, but also offering, if you want to send me an email and have me talk with a candidate or a new hire about what their commute options are, and then how what we offer fits into where they're living. That's been really effective.
Awesome. Okay, very cool. Another quick question here we got for both of you. Do either NVIDIA or Kite charge for parking? I'll start with you, Tamar.
No, so we fully subsidize the parking. It's not bundled into our lease, so we do pay above the must-take. We are paying per space at all but one of our sites, and that's what's triggered the parking cash-out law, which is a state law in California. But we have to date been fully subsidizing that. And right now, about 20% of employees have opted to do the cash out, and then the others pay directly. And I think just from the business side, they've elected to wanting to subsidize the parking fully for those who elect to take it.
Okay. And Brant, how about you?
No, we do not charge for parking, whether underground or surface. We also implemented a valet parking service, which is complimentary. both for regular parking and then all on our electric vehicle chargers. So we offer top-off charging for electric vehicles, and then the valets will rotate them out to available parking spots so that we can maximize the usage by our employees of that service.
Okay, wonderful. This next question is actually for Eric. Eric, do you find that apartments far from transit stops also take advantage of shuttles to transit or to transit hubs?
You're referring to like first mile shuttles is that what you're?
Yeah.
I think the question-
Yeah.
Yeah. We do see it in some cases. The density has to be pretty significant for, especially if you're talking about it being a private shuttle associated with a corporation. You got to have good significant density, but definitely happens in some areas where we have that level of density.
Okay. Great. And then I'm going to shift back over to Brant and Tamar again here. Another question that came out is, do either of you use an account with Uber and Lyft, or do you offer on-demand transportation for your employees? I'll start with you, Brant.
No, we do not have a corporate account. Employees have individual accounts. We have an emergency ride home program. So as a way of incentivizing our employees to use public transit, we guarantee them a ride home in the event they get here and need to go home for an emergency or whatever reason. And then we'll reimburse the cost of an Uber or Lyft ride home.
Okay. And Tamar?
So we currently also have the guaranteed ride home. We are working through on our end the potential to have an Uber or Lyft account, but the way that it would be used would not be for commuting. It would be more for that intercampus, or also being able to front load the guaranteed ride home so that it's not reimbursement based. So right now we're working through at a corporate level, are we able to have that business relationship with them? But from a commute perspective, how the IRS actually determines like what is a taxable versus non-taxable, my understanding is that if you were saying, hey, any employee can take Uber or Lyft to work and here's an account to use that, it would wind up starting to have to like involve payroll because it's considered a taxable transportation option, which makes it a little bit trickier. And also local agencies view Uber and Lyft as the same as a single occupancy vehicle because the driver is driving you, they're not your carpool buddy. With that said, because of the commute benefits that you use for transit, now they're hooked up so that you can use Uber Pool or Lyft Line. It will only hail the 7-seat vehicles or larger, so it's not always equivalent, but it is an option for people who are fairly close by who may not be right on a transit line.
Okay.
I had one other comment.
Yeah.
We also have a relationship with Scoop, which is an application, ride-sharing carpooling app. So, and that's very similar to Uber and Lyft. Except that with Scoop, employees can be drivers as well, and they get credits in their account. So it takes advantage of both sides, so to speak. And then we do subsidize that, so our employees get that benefit for basically $1 is the cost per ride.
Okay. And to kind of play off of that a little bit, Brant, I know you mentioned, we had a question here, van pool and carpool services that you offer as other options. Just curious, who have you partnered with and who are you working with in those regards?
Well, as I mentioned, Scoop is who we partnered with for ride-sharing carpooling. Mm-hmm. On the van pooling side, we have established a process whereby our employees, we basically hook up our employees with Enterprise, of course, who provides car rental and van pool services. So our employees can then rent the van. They get a group of employees to rent the van. And then the relationship then is between the employee and Enterprise when we talk about insurance. So there's no liability corporate liability for that particular service.
And we're
Okay.
taking a similar approach. So for carpools, we're going to be launching that subsidy program and using Waze Carpool for that. They're doing some pilots right now in Santa Monica, and it was just a little bit easier access given the built environment around here to be able to get that minimum worker base to be able to carpool in and have a carpool verification. And then LA Metro actually has a pretty robust van pool program. It had initially just been with Enterprise as the van pool provider, but they just launched or updated their bench. So now there's 3 vehicle providers. So there's a relationship between the van pool coordinator and Metro, one with the vehicle provider and then with the employer. So I've been meeting with each group individually to set up their structure so that we can grow those and grow the program further.
Okay. A few more here. Brant, you had mentioned employee participation programs as your primary key performance measure. Do you have any others? And the same would go with you, Tamar. What are Kite's performance indicators? And I'll start with you, Brant.
Not really. We're really keying on getting cars out of the parking lot, so it directly correlates to employee participation. And then through the registration process, ensure that we have a good handle on what that participation is. Whether instead of saying that somebody who rides a train one day a week is really a participant, or somebody that rides a bike to work is really a participant, we're looking for at least 2 to 3 days a week. And that's what's required in order to be defined as an alternative commuter and get our subsidy when we talk about public transit and van pooling.
Okay, and Tamar?
So employee participation is one of the pieces that I'm tracking right now. So I had some data of what we had prior to launching all of these programs, and then as we're getting enrollments. And then for each program, drilling it down to what's that ridership. On top of that, we do have the annual commute survey. So that's where we're measuring our AVR. So making sure that we are leading towards more and more of the ride sharing from an environmental compliance component. And I'm currently working with HR to figure out how we can measure the impact on recruiting and retention. So what are ways that we can see that this is helping us recruit a candidate that we really wanted, or also retain candidates that we may have had challenges retaining in the past because the commute became too much.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to add, if I may. So in answering that question, as far as the metrics or KPIs that we track, that's the principal one, as I mentioned. Our organization does have other metrics for things like sustainability, right? Reducing the carbon footprint. So as an example, while electric vehicles doesn't get cars out of the parking lot, it does reduce our carbon footprint. So we contribute to metrics tracked and measured and reported by other parts of the company. But as far as my Green to Work team, the employee participation is the one that we track and report.
Okay, great. Just a couple more questions here. We'll wrap it up. For both of you, Brant and Tamar, how are local regulations or development agreements impacting or guiding your programs at all? I'll start with you, Tamar.
So in many cases, like for my work, it actually really does guide a lot of it because we have in one of our development agreements really spelled out what we shall offer. So not just the AVR, but we shall charge for parking, we shall provide a transportation subsidy, things like that. But they are also very complementary to what our employee needs are. So really being able to communicate that instead of different groups within the company seeing the development agreement as a hindrance for the ability to do business, looking at it as an opportunity for us to take these and fold it into shaping a program that works well for our employees. Because a lot of the goals of the city or the governing agency, both in our site that has the development agreement and at our other locations, are also ones that if we take what their goal is, which is, you know, reduced vehicle emissions, reduced congestion, and what our employee needs are, which are, you know, flexible ways of getting to work, not sitting behind the wheel in traffic, we can provide a program that hits both at the same time. It's just how you're painting that picture that's really different. And that was one of the mind changes that I had, because when I came into this role, having been, you know, working as a transportation planner with lots of like-minded individuals, you know, I think of just the sustainability side, the government side, and I mean, at a higher level on the corporate side, yes, they realize that has to be addressed, but that's not, you know, what they're losing sleep about at night. They're losing sleep about their employees and how are they able to continue to grow the company and address their employee needs. So it does drive a lot, but it's how it's communicated internally. It's more about how it syncs up as opposed to that being communicated as the key driver for a program.
Okay, and Brant, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, what guidelines we follow from the city, as I mentioned earlier, the principal one is we're required to have a robust, a viable alternative commuter program, but the threshold is only 10% employee participation. So as I indicated, we're well above that at 40%. So we have to report that to the city of Santa Clara, and that is a stipulation as a requirement for the permitting process. Also, we do have an annual reporting requirement. It's the Silicon Valley Clean Air Coalition to ensure that, you know, we're doing our fair share to reduce our carbon footprint. Also, we participate with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, who of course endorses a number of programs, particularly on the transportation side. We participated in Measure B, support for Measure B, which was the end of 2016, for improving the surface street infrastructure here in Silicon Valley, and a number of programs that contribute to alternative commuting, like biking, connecting bike paths in the South Bay area, as an example. So we also have established a relationship with some of our local organizations, like a VTA, as an example. We have a number of buses that run, and we're actually trying to establish a bus route, an express bus route that will come through our campus. Haven't gotten a lot of traction with that yet because there's still a lot of activity going on with the VTA, but that still remains an end goal. Anyway, that's where we're at.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brant. Just got another question in here. How does the registration process work at NVIDIA for carpools and other programs?
We ask that our employees register with us first of all on we call it our managed carpool program. So we incentivize that by offering a dedicated parking with a carpool placard, just like as if they were a handicap parking. So they register with us. They need to be NVIDIA employees in the carpool, register their vehicles, and then they can use the parking. Beyond that, as I said, Scoop is our Scoop managed program by comparison, and that's with a consortium of companies here in the South Bay. So they register obviously with Scoop, establish an account with them, and while they don't get preferred parking here, they do get the $1 per ride cost.
Okay, great. Thank you. Last question here for you guys. How do you work with local TMA and TMOs if they are in your area? How are you working with them? And I'll start with you, Tamar.
Yeah, so we have GoSamo TMO. That's the Santa Monica Transportation Management Organization, and they're fantastic. They actually reach out to every company as soon as they realize that there's, once they know who the employee transportation coordinator is, or know that there's a larger employer coming into the area, or even one in Santa Monica, they actually have to go through ETC training as soon as you have 30 employees at a work site here. So they've made a really active effort to take that first step. And then from there, actually, I lucked into the fact that the executive director for the TMO was someone who I had worked with at WTS. So she provided me the opportunity to join the advisory team for the TMO. So now I engage directly with the city, with the TMO, with other TMO stakeholders, and am able to provide input and be a key stakeholder for them. So it's been a bit of luck of having that connection, and also our TMO is just very proactive and engaged and has a lot of support from the city.
Excellent. Okay, great. Brant?
Yeah, for us, pretty much the same with the cities of Santa Clara, San Jose, but again, as I mentioned, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group is pretty well pervasive throughout the valley, and that's where a lot of our liaison has been.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I just want to take a moment and thank you all again for joining us today. It's been a great webinar, tons of questions from our audience. And just for folks listening in, up on the screen here is all of our panelists' contact information. If there was a question that didn't get answered today that you wanted to ask, feel free to reach out to our panelists. And again, we will be this session is recorded, and we'll be posting it up on the ACT website in our webinar section within 24 hours. Again, thank you all for being here today, and thank you again to the panelists. It was a wonderful presentation, and we'll see you back here next month for our October webinar. Thank you again. Bye.